The Taliban gains ground in the north as foreign leaders talk about sending more troops to Afghanistan. Is the government losing control? Where is the country heading politically? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Sami Zaidan. The Afghan government has lost control of nearly 5% of its territory to the Taliban since the beginning of the year. Now, recent headlines proclaim the armed group continues to gain ground. It's now captured Qala-e Zal district, just outside the northern city of Kunduz. It's the second to fall since the launch of the annual spring offensive last week. Fighters control small pockets in the east near Kabul and a large part of the south near Lashkar Gah. It's also got a foothold in the west near Herat. And a recent report says the Taliban now controls 19 out of approximately 400 governing districts. Heavy fighting near Kunduz this week has seen Afghan forces pull out of the Qala-e Zal district after 24 hours of fighting. And the Taliban took control of local police headquarters, all security checkpoints, and the governor's compound. As the security situation deteriorates, the country is going round in circles. Let's take you back in time then. The Taliban was ousted by a US-led invasion back in 2001. NATO-led foreign combat troops then took the main responsibility for maintaining security. After 13 years, NATO formally ended its combat mission in 2014, handing over to Afghan forces. During that time, the US spent $686 billion on Operation Enduring Freedom. There are now about 13,000 servicemen in NATO's current Afghanistan mission, including around 9,000 US troops. Well, let's bring our guests into the show. We have joining us here in the studio Hashmat Mosleh, Al Jazeera's political analyst on Afghanistan and Central Asia. In Kabul, Sadiq Siddiqui, director of the Afghanistan Government Media Centre. And in Sydney via Skype, Roger Shanahan, a research fellow at Lowy Institute, an international policy think tank in Australia. Welcome to you all. If I could start with Mr. Siddiq. So, are Afghan authorities losing control of the situation in the country?
No, we are not losing. The Afghan forces are not losing the control. They have been fighting a tough fight for the past so many years. Last year they had to fight a very tough war fighting, but this year as well. They had many advances in east of Afghanistan, like in Nangarhar, where they were able to contain Daesh in that part of the country.
Well, forgive me for jumping in here, but if you listen to some of the, for example, the Pentagon auditor as a source, it says that today the Afghan government controls around 60% of the country. Back in January 2016, the government controlled 71% of Afghan territory. That sounds like a loss of control to me. Are they wrong?
Well, we actually do not necessarily agree with those kind of reports and understanding of the control, where the Afghan forces control or where the Taliban. So there should be a proper understanding of the existence of the terrorist groups in different parts of the country and the control of the Afghan forces in areas. Well, it's on the ground. You see that, yes, we do have challenges. We have more
essentially what you're telling viewers is that the foreign forces
year
don't understand control of Afghanistan. Is that what you're saying?
No, we do not. I didn't say that. But what I'm saying is that the issue of the presence of the Taliban or terrorists in the country with the version of the control, that's quite very different thing. But our forces, they are controlling the country and they are fighting a tough fight. They are in the front lines. But yes, our challenges have increased. The number of Taliban attacks have increased. We have to fight in many fronts with them, so that's the reality. But in terms of control, if you look at the east of Afghanistan, if you look at the south as well, or in the central of Afghanistan, Afghan forces have expanded their territory and grip of those areas which were not in the past there. So we do control, we will control, and we will deny the terrorist groups to have safe havens in Afghanistan, and we are fighting a very difficult war here. And that's the reality, and everybody has to understand that reality.
All right, let's take that understanding to the studio here. Do you agree with that then, Hashmat, as we're hearing there from Mr. Siddique? Perhaps there is a misunderstanding. The outside world has misunderstood the issue of control. Regardless of what the headlines may be screaming at us, they're in control of the country.
Well, if you look at that language that's just being used by our guest, shows that there is a disparity between what the government is saying and what the reality in Afghanistan is. The idea that we are fighting a good fight, no, you shouldn't be fighting a good fight. There should not have been Taliban in Afghanistan in the first place after 2001, because Mohammad Karzai's government inherited in Afghanistan that was completely taken. There were no Taliban. I was in Afghanistan in the early years of 2001, 2002, 2003 to 2004, and I've traveled to Afghanistan many years later after that. In the early days, there were no Taliban in the south. The government had the opportunity to extend its control throughout the country. But what the government instead did, got itself involved in a power politics at the tribal and ethnic level. And this is where we are today in Afghanistan, where it's a government of national unity based on trying to patch up its tribal differences within, its ethnic differences within.
Okay, but Hashmat, to be devil's advocate here, is it working? As Mr. Siddique is pointing out there, that he's saying they are expanding the area they control in the south, for example.
Again, that language, we are expanding. You are expanding against who? You are expanding against people who are lightly armed but highly motivated. The question is, why can't you motivate your own armed forces? And the main reason why the Afghanistan's armed forces cannot be motivated is this, that they feel ashamed to be fighting in a front line where next to them are foreign forces. Afghans can fight their war alone, like they did in the past. All they need is foreign international pressure on the neighboring countries around Afghanistan not to support the Taliban, which this government is not doing that, by the way. This government is extending its hand to Pakistan and all the backers of the Taliban. And as we know, very recently, Russia has been accused of funding or supplying weapons to Taliban.
These are accusations. We should just make it very clear. But, right.
But the Afghan government is silent on that. It's not making a position very clear. So the idea of expanding, it means that you lost something, and you are losing.
All right, let's take the issue perhaps to Sydney. Roger, how are we in a situation where it seems at least that we're hearing about more and more Taliban successes lately? They've taken over, only on Saturday they took over another district just outside of Kunduz.
Well, I suppose it's a combination of what the previous speaker has said about the notion of security forces in Afghanistan being motivated to work for a central government that they believe is worth fighting for, and they believe that they are part of and that represents them. That kind of motivation allows security forces to go out into the areas and exert the writ of the government. And if they're not getting out there, then it allows a vacuum to develop, which the Taliban have proven themselves quite adept at filling. And I think we just have to see the recent move of 300 to 400 US Marines back into Helmand province after not having been there for a number of years is a pretty good indication that the Afghan security forces on their own are not able to prosecute the war against the Taliban, and it needs a continuation of the advise and assist mission into areas where it was believed that they wouldn't be required anymore.
All right, let me take that point back to Mr. Siddique. There, a report last month that I'm sure you're aware of by the Pentagon auditor said Afghan forces have suffered shockingly high casualties, 807 killed in just 2 months. Is this a fight that can be sustained at the rate of bleeding that's going on?
Again, I don't want to comment on those reports. The number of the casualties by the Afghan forces, they will be the organizations that they will release those numbers. Second, you know, when coming back to the so-called term that some people will say that if a district falls, that will be a success for the Taliban. How do you gauge that? For example, there are nearly 400 districts, and the Afghan forces are trying to protect people in these districts. And if one district falls, then we will say that's a success. And also, let me also be clear that the Taliban or the terrorists, they do not have strategic gains in Afghanistan. You know, they are not kind of a strategic holding somewhere with a large population. But unfortunately, yes, they have been the biggest threat. People have suffered in those areas when they attack on the district centers or when they block highways. But to be very clear here that the Afghan forces, for the past so many years now, they know how to protect and deny territory for these terrorist groups. Of course, they have a very difficult job. It's not easy to be in Afghanistan in the front line and protect this country from so many terrorist groups who are functioning, who unfortunately still have lots of support outside Afghanistan. And you see lots of rumors that even they receive supports from other countries besides Pakistan. So that's a very difficult job in front of the Afghan security forces, and they are trying to protect people in Afghanistan. With the loss, with the sacrifices, yes, there's an increase in the number of the casualties in the Afghan security forces.
So let's give Hashmat a chance to comment in briefly, Hashmat.
Sorry, you keep on saying the terrorists, the terrorists, the terrorists. And while we know in Afghanistan local media that I follow as well, the president never called the Taliban a terrorist organization. And there has never been a push to put the Taliban on the list of terrorist organizations at the United Nations level. So now you have a new toy to play with, which is called ISIS.
Can I interrupt here?
Okay,
and people are getting confused.
Hashmat, then we'll give Sadiq another chance.
The people are confused. When you say terrorists and Taliban, who is a terrorist, who is a Taliban?
All right, go ahead, Mr. Sadiq.
Yeah, can I interrupt here? Yeah. The Afghan government position has been very clear recently, at least in the past few years, like 2 years. The Afghan president has said it many times that anybody who kills Afghans, anybody, the Taliban, any group, name it, they are terrorists and they are the enemies of the Afghan people. So there's no confusion now. There has been no confusion. And there's no confusion in the Afghan security forces when they are going and they are fighting the Taliban. So that has to be very clear, and that should not undermine the sacrifices of the Afghan security forces.
Okay, if I could come back, Mr. Sadiq, to my initial question.
American drones are also killing Afghan civilians.
The Pentagon auditor is saying you're losing forces at a shockingly high rate. Like I said, over 800 people in 6 weeks. Can you continue to fight with that sort of casualty level, or are you saying that casualty level is not accurate and the Pentagon is wrong?
Well, the number of the casualties, unfortunately, yes, there has been an increase in the number. And because they have to protect the country. And protecting Afghanistan, we have to pay a price. And there's no other option. We do not have any other option except to protect our country from these terrorists and deny safe havens for the groups like the Taliban, like Daesh, like terrorists. So there's no other alternative. The option is to save the next generations of Afghanistan and the country itself.
All right, let's move on. I want to go back to Roger in Sydney. The US Congress has appropriated more than $117 billion to Afghan reconstruction, and 60% of that has gone to the Afghan security forces. Why has that money not produced better results than what we're talking about today?
Well, I mean, that's a key question. There appears to be several reasons for that. First of all, there's concerns over the degree of corruption within the Afghan political and also the military system, and a senior commander from Helmand was reportedly dismissed from his post recently on charges of corruption. And once you get to that stage, as the previous speaker pointed out, while there are increases in the casualty rates of the Afghan security forces, that would probably be less of a worry. It's still a worry, obviously, but it would be less of a worry if the Afghan security forces were incurring those casualties while they were increasing their footprint in the areas that they're supposed to be patrolling. But we're seeing not only a spike in the numbers of Afghan casualties, but a loss of control in several provincial areas. So we're seeing a collision of two downward trends, an increase in casualties and a loss of government control. And as you pointed out, the US government and other governments have been pouring money into Afghanistan for years now. So the difficulty is the notion of corruption at several levels in Afghanistan, also the notion of a security...
If that's the case, then, Roger, forgive me for jumping in here as well, but where is the country, where is the government heading? Do you agree with those analysts who say A collapse might be on the cards, either slowly or over years, or a result of some shattering military defeat. I mean, where do you see this government heading?
Well, I think what Taliban wants to do, and all the opponents of the Afghan government and those who are also opposed to US and Western involvement in Afghanistan, they're looking at an attritional battle against, first of all, the Afghan security forces, and then whatever Western forces they're able to target, although that is becoming and has been increasingly difficult. I don't see in the immediate future any kind of dramatic collapse in either security forces or the Afghan government, but certainly these kind of attrition that has been prosecuted against security forces is having an impact on the confidence of the population in the Afghan government.
Right. Okay. So it's having impact. It is having impact. Hashim, is that going to lead to more foreign troops pouring back into Afghanistan? We've heard from Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, last month, saying that the alliance will decide in June about sending more troops into Afghanistan.
Yeah, but before I answer that question, I want to add this. Successive current Afghan governments since the Bonn Agreement up to now has legitimized themselves not by the rights of their own, but by the wrongs of others, constantly calling a group of people in the country as warlords. When you tell the Afghan government, why don't you bring development, they say warlords. Now the warlords is forgotten. They have brought a new terminology, which is called terrorist. Terrorism in Afghanistan no longer has currency. If you use the word terrorist, I see on social media youth saying, yes, I am a terrorist, if that's what terrorism means. So the government is tied in its slogan of terrorism, warlords, these people are anti-women. It does not work. You make promises, you have to bring those promises, and you have to make them give fruit in Afghanistan.
All right, I'm sure we'll give Mr. Sadiq, I'm sure he wants to come back in on some of those. We'll give him a chance. But yeah, but Hashim, what I want you to try and get into is, are we going to see a return of foreign troops heading back into the country now?
Well, the return of foreign troops is going to create another problem. Right now, the government managed to make some type of a peace agreement with Hizb Islami of Hekmatyar. The cornerstone of that agreement is foreign troops will leave Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. With him coming into Afghanistan, if you want to delegitimize and undermine that peace agreement, bring more foreign forces, which by the looks of it, there are forces in Afghanistan who would like that to be undermined and delegitimized. So the foreign forces in Afghanistan is going to exacerbate the situation.
Right, okay.
We have to allow the Afghan National Army to develop its own muscle, develop its own strategy, and fight its own wars.
All right, let me, I'm sure Mr. Sadiq wants to get in and come back on a bunch of points which have been mentioned there, so I'm going to give you a chance to do that. But if I could also ask you to address the issue of whether the Afghan government wants to see more foreign troops come in. Go ahead, sir.
First of all, the Afghan government has the Afghan people's support, and well, we should not really paint that doomy picture of the country. Yes, we do have challenges that we have to accept that, but despite all those challenges, we will have to go forward, and that's the destination that the Afghan people have decided. We do need assistance from the international community, as they have been helping us for so many years now. We will need more assistance in terms of capabilities for the enablers for the Afghan security forces, and the next 4-year security plan, which is already devised by the Afghan government, agreed by, and in consultation with the international partners here in Afghanistan, that will pave the way for stability in the country.
And does that plan include a request for more US troops, Mr.
wants
Siddiqui?
the Taliban to come back. Yes, there will be need for more troops for the advise and training mission, and also to combat together and defeat the common enemy, which is the terrorism in Afghanistan.
Won't that exacerbate the situation, as some analysts say? Why would this round of more foreign troops help when previous rounds of even larger numbers of foreign troops didn't solve the Afghan question?
Well, the problem will be solved, and the partnership that we have built on so many years now. Of course, the level of threats, the groups, the terrorist groups who function and operate in Afghanistan and the region, we will not be able to really come to a success quite soon. So there will be a need for our partners to support us more when it comes to training, equipment, and warfare technology in order to overcome all these challenges. So the mission will be a difficult mission, but of course, in the next few years, as it's planned right now by the Afghan security forces, in reference to all experiences and and challenges they had in the past. So we will look forward, and the political environment will also make it easy for the Afghan security forces to really focus on their mission, defeating the Taliban, on all those groups who are fighting against the Afghan people.
All right, Roger, let me give Roger a chance here. Is the country, by bringing in more foreign troops, do you agree with the outlook that says that will put pressure on the Taliban to come back to the political, or come to the political negotiating table, or is the country really heading further away from a political settlement?
Well, I think the intent is the former of what you said. You can't just continue to play the same game that you've played previously and continue to train the Afghan security forces, then draw down your troops, and then when they require bolstering, to build up your troop numbers again. But we've seen both the US military commander in Afghanistan, we've seen the central commander of Central Command, both say that they believe additional forces are required in Afghanistan, and the rationale behind that must be to be able to put pressure on the Taliban to get closer to a political solution. Because in the end, a political solution is the only way that we'll see an end to the fighting in Afghanistan, and for Western troops to eventually leave. The kind of long-term train and assist mission has already been going on for several years, and we're not seeing the fruits of that being borne out on the ground by the Afghan security forces. So I think everybody concerned, if additional troops come in, is for a relatively specific set of strategic aims, which is to get the Taliban to the negotiating table.
Okay, you wanted to come in on something, and I want you to address the question of politically. Is the country heading towards some kind of breakup, federalism?
Well, federalism would be a solution to Afghanistan's current crisis. Afghanistan at the moment has a government that has no war strategy or peace strategy. Whatever it has as a peace strategy, it is really a tribal peace strategy, where the government is looking at the Taliban as a possible future numbers for them to boost their control within the existing power divide in Afghanistan. This is the main problem in Afghanistan. You look at the Afghan forces, they are better equipped, they are better trained, and yet they cannot defeat the Taliban. They want more foreign forces. Taliban do not have an infrastructure that can be bombed out of existence. Taliban are an ideological, tribal movement. They have roots in this country, and they, in 2001 massacres, they said they are finished. In 2002, they said they are finished.
No,
Very recently, Amrullah Saleh, one of Afghanistan's former head of intelligence, on one of the Afghan television programs, said Taliban are completely finished.
All right, let's give Mr. Sadiq a chance, because I think we've got only about a minute left, so let me give him a chance to come back in on
yes.
some of that.
No,
Go ahead.
absolutely. Yeah. I think it's absolutely unfair to say that there's no war and peace strategy. If you look at the peace strategy, you know what happened. The government was able to bring in somebody who have been fighting for so many years now, and he's part of the peace process.
Into government.
And if you look at
give him a chance.
Strategy,
go ahead, Mr. Sadiq.
No. You will have to listen to this, and you have to acknowledge that how it was difficult to bring somebody who has been involved in the fighting against the government for a long time. So that's the peace strategy. Very clear. Those who accept the Afghan constitution, so they will be part of the peace process. But when it comes to fighting, yes, we will be very tough on those who will continue to fight against us. The Taliban is not an ideologue. They are a group supported by outsiders. They are part of terrorism, and they are in the hand of others. They do not have roots in Afghanistan, and it should be very clear, and you should know about that as well. Unfortunately, they have safe havens outside the country, and who created them and how they are still being supported by those groups outside Afghanistan. So they have nothing to do with their roots in Afghanistan. If it was the case, so the Afghan people would support them in the past so many years, and you see there's no people support to this group.
That's going to bring the government down.
Okay. I'm sorry, gentlemen. I know this discussion can go on for a lot longer, but we are going to have to leave it here for now. Let's thank our guests, Hashmat Mosleh here in the studio, Sadiq Siddiqui, and Roger Shanahan. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zaidan, and the whole team here for now, it's goodbye.